This story is titled, My Cheating Wife, Who Left Me When I Was Hospitalized, is Now Begging for Forgiveness 4 years later. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi Reddit, I'm Nate, 42 from Illinois. And let me tell you, life has a way of flipping on you when you least expect it. 4 years ago, when I was 38, I had a pretty normal life. I was married to Heather, and we had 3 kids, Ellie, 12, Liam, 11, and Zoe, 7. I worked as a construction site supervisor. It was a job that wasn't exactly cushy, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. I liked knowing that I was building something. Everything felt stable, or as stable as life can feel when you're raising 3 kids and constantly juggling work and family. I wasn't perfect, but I was showing up. Late nights on the site, weekends fixing things around the house, and when I could, making it to Ellie's volleyball games or Liam's science fairs. Zoe loved drawing, so she'd often sit with me in the evenings, showing off her latest masterpiece. I lived for those moments. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. It was a rainy day, which always made the site a little sketchy. I was out inspecting some scaffolding on the second floor of a new warehouse we were building. It was the kind of thing I'd done hundreds of times. Honestly, I didn't think twice about it. As I stepped onto the platform, there was this sharp snap, like someone breaking a thick branch. Before I could react, the whole thing gave out beneath me. It wasn't slow or dramatic like in the movies. It was just gone. I fell 2 stories straight onto the concrete. The weird thing is, I don't even remember the pain right away. It was more like my brain just shut off the sound and feeling for a few seconds. I was lying there, staring up at the gray sky, thinking, well, this is bad. My body wouldn't move, and I couldn't tell if it was because of the impact or sheer panic. The guys on the site rushed over. I could hear their voices, someone yelling to call 911, another guy trying to talk to me, telling me to stay awake. I remember thinking, am I dying? Is this it? The paramedics came, and everything after that was a blur. I remember flashes, sirens, bright hospital lights, someone cutting my shirt open. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, strapped into more equipment than I'd ever seen outside of a sci-fi movie. A nurse was there when I woke up, all calm and professional. You've had quite the fall, she said. We had to do surgery on your back. You're stable now, but there's significant damage. She didn't sugarcoat it. I had fractured several vertebrae in my lower back, broken 2 ribs, and torn up my right shoulder. The doctor said they'd done everything they could, but the damage to my spine was severe. You may never walk properly again, the surgeon told me the next morning. He wasn't mean about it, just matter of fact. That was the moment it all hit me. I'd gone from being a guy who could carry a 100-pound beam up a flight of stairs to someone who might need help just to stand up. My job? Gone. The way I supported my family? Gone. Even basic stuff, like running around with my kids or fixing a leaky pipe, seemed like it might be off the table. Heather was there when the doctor told me. She cried, which I appreciated at the time, but there was something about the way she cried that stuck with me. It wasn't just sadness. It was like she was overwhelmed, maybe even resentful. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, texting someone, which felt odd. I tried to chalk it up to stress. The first few days in the hospital were rough. The pain was constant, even with the meds, and I was too weak to do much of anything. Heather was around, but not as much as I thought she'd be. She said the kids were scared to see me like that, which I understood, but it still hurt. I wanted to see them more than anything. My mom visited a couple of times, and my brother Mike came by when he could. The worst part wasn't even the pain or the surgeries. It was the not knowing. I kept asking the doctors if I'd ever walk again, and they kept giving me the same vague answers. They'd say, we'll have to see how your recovery goes. Every time I heard it, I felt more hopeless. By the second week, I started physical therapy, which was its own kind of torture. Just sitting up in bed felt like running a marathon. The therapist kept telling me to trust the process, but all I could think was, what if this is as good as it gets? The kids finally visited about 3 weeks after the accident. I was so excited to see them, but it was awkward. Ellie hugged me, but it felt like she didn't know how to act. Liam just stared at the floor, and Zoe wouldn't even let go of Heather's hand. Daddy's going to get better, I told them, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. It's just going to take time. Ellie nodded, trying to look brave, but I could see the worry in her eyes. They didn't stay long. Heather said it was too much for them to handle, and I didn't argue. What could I say? I felt like a shell of the dad I used to be. So yeah, that's how it all started. One rainy day, one snap, and my whole life flipped. I didn't know it at the time, but this was just the beginning of a long, messy road. And trust me, it only gets weirder from here. Let me tell you, rehab is no picnic. But honestly, it wasn't even the hardest part of my recovery. The real pain was watching my wife, Heather, check out emotionally while I was stuck in that hospital bed. If I wasn't already broken from the fall, what she did next sure as hell finished the job. At first, she tried to keep up appearances. She'd pop in every couple of days, bring me something from home, or sit awkwardly by the bed scrolling through her phone. The energy was off, though. It wasn't just stress. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. When I got transferred to the rehab facility, it became even more obvious. Heather's visits started dwindling fast. First, it was every other day, then twice a week, and before I knew it, I was lucky if she showed up on Sundays. I kept asking her to bring the kids. They were my lifeline, the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. But she always had some excuse. Ellie's got volleyball practice. Liam has a big math test tomorrow. Zoe's too scared to see you like this. It stung every time. I mean, yeah, I wasn't looking my best, pale, skinny, stuck in a wheelchair, but I was still their dad. I missed them like crazy, and it felt like Heather was the gatekeeper, deciding how much of a father I was allowed to be. A few weeks into rehab, I started to notice Heather was distant. I'm not just talking physically, though that was part of it. She'd sit with me for 10 minutes and then claim she had to run errands. One time, she stayed long enough to scroll through Instagram, laughing at memes, while I was literally trying to figure out how to move my legs again. I tried to talk to her about it. Heather, I need you right now. I can't do this alone. She sighed, like I'd asked her to climb Everest. Nate, I'm doing my best, but this is a lot. I'm juggling everything and it's exhausting. I didn't push it. What could I say? She was right that it was a lot, but I was the one actually living it, and she made it sound like my accident was some personal inconvenience to her. Then came the moment that flipped everything. She walked into my room one afternoon, looking way too put together. New haircut, nice dress, makeup done like she was going to a fancy brunch. At first, I thought maybe she was trying to cheer me up. But nope. She sat down, pulled out some papers, and said, I've been thinking, and I don't think I can do this anymore. I blinked, completely confused. Do what? This. Us. She slid the papers across the table like she was handing me a menu. Divorce papers. I can't do this, Nate, she said, shaking her head like she was the one who fell 2 stories onto concrete. I need someone who can actually contribute. Contribute? I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, but I couldn't even stand up. She made it sound like I'd chosen to be in that hospital bed, like this was all some elaborate scheme to ruin her life. All I managed to say was, You're serious? She nodded, looking more relieved than guilty. It's better for everyone this way. The kids need stability, and I can't give them that if I'm constantly taking care of you. It took me a minute to process what was happening. I wanted to fight, but what was I going to fight with? My health was shot. My job was gone, and I had no money to even hire a lawyer. All I could do was sit there, stunned, while she left the room. The divorce moved fast. Too fast. Within weeks, it was finalized. I got nothing. Not even visitation rights for the kids. Heather claimed moving between homes wouldn't be good for them. It was total BS, but I didn't have the resources to fight her in court. Then, as if that wasn't enough of a slap in the face, I found out she was already dating someone. His name was Chase. Of course, his name was Chase. He was a 28-year-old personal trainer who looked like he spent more time flexing in the mirror than reading books. From what I gathered, Chase was in some sort of rebuilding phase. Apparently, his last girlfriend had dumped him for a yoga instructor, and he needed a fresh start with someone older and wiser. Heather, 37 back then, fresh off ditching me, must have seemed like a good way to reset. My brother Mike couldn't stop laughing when he heard. So she left you for a guy whose entire personality is protein shakes and arm day? Yup, I said. Apparently, that's what she needed to feel stable. What really crushed me wasn't Chase, though. It was the fact that Heather took the kids and moved out of state with him. She didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye properly. One day they were here, and the next they were gone. The kids stopped being my lifeline because Heather made sure the cord was cut. I missed Ellie's 13th birthday. I missed Liam's first soccer game as captain. I missed Zoe's school art show. They were growing up, and I wasn't there to see it. Meanwhile, Heather and Chase were living it up, or at least pretending to. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot of Heather's Facebook. She and Chase were posing in front of some fancy cabin in the mountains, all smiles and hashtags about new beginnings. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about my kids. I kept wondering, what kind of guy is Chase to them? Does he care about them? Does he even try? Something told me he was more interested in being their cool buddy than a father figure. That's how my world fell apart. Again. And knowing my kids were growing up thinking I didn't care, that was the hardest part of all. Meanwhile, I moved in with my older brother Mike because, well, where else was I going to go? Mike's the kind of guy who's allergic to emotional conversations but shows up when it counts. He works as an electrician and has a small house that smells like burnt coffee and old wood. When I rolled in with a bag of clothes and a broken spirit, he just said, "Couch is yours. Don't stink it up." That was his way of being supportive. The first week was rough. I just sat there, staring at daytime TV, which, let me tell you, is its own brand of depressing. Judge shows infomercials for miracle cleaning products. It was like a parade of useless nonsense. I was wallowing, and Mike wasn't having it. One night, he said, "You've got a week to feel sorry for yourself. After that, get your ass up and figure something out." It wasn't exactly a motivational speech, but it was what I needed. My first step was hiring a lawyer to go after the construction company. The fall wasn't some freak accident. It was negligence. The scaffolding had been flagged as unsafe by one of the guys on site, but management ignored it because they didn't want to delay progress. Well, progress delayed me walking properly, so I wasn't letting it slide. Rick, my lawyer, was an old-school guy with a bad comb-over and an endless supply of terrible ties, but he knew his stuff. "We've got a strong case," he said. "They're going to fight it, though. Companies like this always do." And boy, was he right. Their lawyers were relentless. They kept trying to pin the blame on me, claiming I hadn't been cautious enough while inspecting the site, as if I was supposed to magically know the platform was going to collapse. It was infuriating, but Rick told me to hang tight. "This is going to take time," he said, which basically meant I was in legal limbo. While the lawsuit crawled along at a snail's pace, I continued physical therapy. At first, I couldn't even sit up without feeling like my spine was being stabbed, but the therapists were relentless, in a good way. Every day, they pushed me to do just a little more. The small victories kept me going. The first time I managed to stand for a few seconds, I felt like I just climbed Everest. The first time I took a shaky step, I almost cried. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't fast, but it was progress. Mike, for all his tough love attitude, was actually a huge help. He set up a makeshift gym in his garage with some old equipment he found on Craigslist. "You're gonna hate this," he said as he handed me resistance bands. And he was right. I did. But it worked. The best thing Mike did, though, was drag me to a local support group for injured workers. At first, I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting in a circle and sharing my feelings sounded awful, but Mike wouldn't take no for an answer. "Look, these people get it," he said. "You can't keep pretending you're the only guy in the world who's been through crap." He had a point, so I went. The group was small, maybe 8 or 9 people, and they weren't the sit around and cry type I'd been dreading. It was mostly guys like me who'd been injured on the job. There was Carl, who'd fallen off a roof while fixing shingles, Dave, who'd crushed his hand in a machine, and Pete, who'd gotten hit by a forklift. We didn't spend much time talking about our injuries. Instead, it was mostly war stories about dealing with crappy insurance companies, fighting lawsuits, and figuring out how to adjust to a new normal. "Man, you ever try explaining to your kid why you can't throw a baseball anymore?" Pete said one night. "I told my son my pitching arm was retired. He said, 'Good, because you were never good at it anyway.'" We all cracked up. That was the thing about the group. It was real, but it wasn't heavy. We traded bad jokes and shared tips on how to deal with the system. It felt good to be around people who got it. The lawsuit was still dragging on, and I was barely scraping by. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. It wasn't much, but it was something. I kept telling myself, one step at a time, just keep going. So about a year into my recovery, I met Emma, and things started to change. It all started when Mike got hired to wire a wedding venue for lighting. He asked me to tag along to help with some planning since I was getting decent at logistics stuff. It wasn't like I had anything better to do, so I went. Emma was the catering lead, running around with a clipboard and barking orders at her staff. She was short, with wild brown hair tied up in a bun that looked like it was barely hanging on. But she had this confident energy that made her stand out. She wasn't stressed, she was commanding. There's a big difference. I didn't think much of it at first. I was there to help Mike figure out power access for the lighting rigs, not make new friends. But while I was sitting on the steps outside the barn, taking a break from the chaos, Emma plopped down next to me. Mike's brother, right? She asked, pointing a pen at me. Yep. That obvious? Kind of. You've got the same, don't mess with me face. I laughed because honestly, that was pretty spot on. We got to talking, and I found out she owned the catering company. She'd started it after leaving her ex-husband, who sounded like a real piece of work. She was also raising her 10-year-old son Max on her own. The thing about Emma was that she didn't treat me like I was made of glass. A lot of people did back then. They'd tiptoe around me, afraid to say the wrong thing or bring up my accident. Emma, though? She asked straight up how I'd ended up in physical therapy. When I told her about the fall, she winced and said, "Damn, that sucks. So what are you doing now?" It wasn't pity, it was curiosity. And when I told her I was still figuring things out, she said, "Well, at least you're trying. Some people just give up." That stuck with me. After that day, we kept crossing paths at events the following months. One day, over coffee during a lull at an event, I told her about how I'd been helping Mike with planning and logistics. I joked that I'd become the guy who made sure the chairs were in straight lines and the speakers didn't blow out. Emma didn't laugh. Instead, she said, "You know, you could do this for real." "Do what?" "Event planning. You've got a good eye for details, and you're organized. That's half the battle." I shrugged it off at first. I didn't exactly have a lot of confidence back then. But Emma didn't drop it. A week later, she called me out of nowhere and said, "I've got a crazy idea. Hear me out." Her crazy idea was for us to team up. She'd handle the catering side of things, and I'd handle logistics, scheduling, setup, lighting, sound, all the behind-the-scenes stuff. At first, I thought she was nuts. I mean, who starts a business with a guy who's still doing rehab and living on his brother's couch? But Emma wasn't kidding. I don't know what it was. Her confidence, her persistence, or maybe the fact that I was tired of feeling like a burden. But I said yes. Starting a business is no joke. We were both broke, so we pooled what little money we had and started small, mostly weddings and local fundraisers. I borrowed Mike's truck for hauling gear, and Emma called in every favor she could think of to get us gigs. It was a grind, but we made it work. Max, Emma's son, was around a lot too. He was this sharp, funny kid who somehow managed to be more mature than half the adults I knew. "You guys need to chill," he said one time when Emma and I were arguing over table placements. "It's a wedding, not world peace." I couldn't help but laugh. The kid was right. By the end of that first year of our business, things started to pick up as we landed a few big gigs. "You're walking again," Emma said one day after an event. "You're working. You're putting your life back together. Don't sell yourself short." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until she said it. So that's how Emma came into my life. Fierce, funny, and exactly what I needed when I didn't even know I needed it. Together, we built something out of nothing. And for the first time since my accident, I felt like I was more than just a guy who fell off a scaffold. I felt like me again. You know how some days start like any other and then completely change your life? That's what happened the day my phone rang, and Ellie's name popped up through the Truecaller app I had. I stared at the screen like I'd conjured it up by sheer willpower. I hadn't heard my daughter's voice in 4 years, not since Heather packed up the kids and moved out of state with her gym bro boyfriend, Chase. When I answered, my voice cracked. "Ellie?" "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice sounded older, more grown up than I remembered. "I got my own phone. I wanted to call you. Mom tried to stop me so many times, but I really need to do this." I was too choked up to speak for a second. She kept going. "Can we visit you?" I almost dropped the phone. "What?" "Liam and Zoe want to come too. We miss you." Let me back up. After the accident and Heather leaving, I didn't have the money or health to fight for visitation rights. I could barely afford the gas to get to physical therapy, let alone pay for a lawyer to take Heather to court. I tried, though. I texted. I called. I emailed. Every time, Heather brushed me off or blocked me. "It's not a good time for the kids," she'd say. Or, "They're better off with consistency." Consistency, my ass. She just didn't want me in their lives. I even wrote letters. Actual pen and paper letters, hoping she'd pass them along to Ellie, Liam, and Zoe. I don't think they ever saw a single one. So when Ellie called me out of nowhere, saying they wanted to visit, it felt like a miracle. "Of course you can visit," I told her. "When? Next weekend?" she asked, almost nervously, like I might say no. As if I wouldn't drop everything for this. When I hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at the phone. Mike walked in and saw my face. "What happened? You win the lottery or something?" "Better," I said. Ellie just called. The kids are coming to visit. Mike raised an eyebrow. No kidding? Heather's letting that happen? She doesn't know yet, I said. Ellie has her own phone now. Mike grinned. Well, I'll be damned. Better get the place ready. That week was a blur. I cleaned like a man possessed, even though Mike kept telling me the kids wouldn't care if the house was spotless. I didn't care. I wanted everything to be perfect. Emma offered to help, of course. She even made a welcome home banner for the living room, which was way more thoughtful than anything I'd have come up with. The day they arrived, I drove to the bus station. I got there 30 minutes early because I couldn't sit still. When the bus pulled in, my heart was pounding like I was about to meet them for the first time. I stood there, frozen, until Ellie spotted me. Dad! She yelled, running toward me. She hugged me so tight I thought my still healing back might snap again, but I didn't care. Liam joined the hug next, awkwardly at first, but then he buried his face in my shoulder. Zoe hung back, looking shy, but I crouched down and held out my arms. She ran to me, whispering, I missed you. Over dinner, things started to thaw. Emma had made spaghetti, which Zoe declared was her favorite, and Liam started talking about soccer. Ellie stayed quiet, pushing her food around, but she wasn't ignoring me. It felt like she was watching, waiting to see if I was the same person she remembered. After dinner, Ellie finally spoke up. Mom said you didn't want to see us. I froze. What? She told us you never tried, that you didn't care. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Ellie, that's not true. I wrote letters. I called. I emailed. I begged your mom to let me see you. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. Why didn't you fight for us? I took a deep breath. Because I couldn't. I was broke, Ellie. I was still in physical therapy. I wanted to fight, but I didn't have the money or the strength to win. Ellie didn't say anything for a long time. Liam looked up from his plate. So you did want us? More than anything, I said. You're my kids. I love you. I've always loved you. Zoe, who'd been quiet the whole time, suddenly burst into tears. I knew you loved us, she said, throwing herself into my arms. Ellie followed, and then Liam. We sat there, a pile of tears and hugs, while I tried to explain everything. Later that night, I showed them the court filings, the restraining orders Heather had put in place, and copies of the emails I'd sent. Ellie read every word, her jaw tightening. Liam flipped through the papers, shaking his head. She lied to us, he muttered. She thought she was doing what was best, I said, trying to be fair. But she was wrong. Ellie looked up at me. I'm sorry, Dad, for believing her. You don't have to apologize, I said. You were kids. You trusted her because she's your mom. That seemed to settle something in her. She hugged me again and said, We're here now. The rest of the weekend was incredible. We went to a park, played board games, and stayed up late talking. Ellie opened up about school and friends. Liam showed me some ridiculous trick shots he'd learned in soccer. Zoe stuck to me like glue, asking a million questions about my life and laughing at every dumb joke I made. For the first time in so long, I felt like a dad again. My kids were back, and no one could take that away from me. So things were going pretty great after reconnecting with my kids. We stayed in contact almost every day, and they kept asking me if they could move in with me. That's when Heather decided to stir up drama like it was her life's mission. I should have seen it coming. She's never been one to let other people be happy unless she's at the center of it. It all started about a week after the kids posted a picture with me and Emma on social media. It was one of those cheesy group shots we'd taken at the park, everyone smiling and looking like an actual family. I guess Heather saw it because the next day, my phone lit up with her name. I hesitated before answering. It had been years since I'd heard her voice, and I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly chat. But I picked up. She didn't even bother with a hello. What the hell are you doing, Nate? She spat. Living my life? You brainwashed them, she snapped. The kids. They're talking about how great you are and how awful I've been. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? I almost laughed. Heather, I didn't have to brainwash anyone. They figured it out on their own. Maybe you should have thought about that before lying to them for 4 years. That set her off. She started ranting about how Chase wasn't stepping up, how she'd sacrificed everything for the kids. I stopped her right there. Heather, I'm not the one who packed up and left. You made your choices, and now you're mad that they don't like the consequences. That's on you. She hung up on me, but I knew that wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, a week later, she showed up unannounced at my office. Emma and I were in the middle of setting up logistics for a wedding when Heather waltzed in like she owned the place. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked tired, like life had been chewing her up and spitting her out. Nate, she said, all serious. We need to talk. I sighed and glanced at Emma, who gave me one of those I'm here if you need me looks before stepping into the back. I turned back to Heather. What's this about? She launched into this long-winded speech about how Chase had dumped her. Apparently, he'd decided the whole family man thing wasn't for him anymore, and moved on to dating some TikTok influencer who posts videos of her meal prep routines and gym workouts. Honestly, they're perfect for each other. Heather, who'd built her entire new life around this guy, was now stuck trying to hold everything together on her own. And, I said when she finally paused for breath, and I want us to rebuild the family, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I swear, I almost choked. You mean the family you walked out on? The one you traded for protein shakes and a six-pack? Nate, I was overwhelmed, she said, her voice cracking like she was trying to summon some tears. You don't know how hard it was for me back then. I just stared at her. Heather, I was the one lying in a hospital bed with a broken back. You didn't even stick around long enough to find out if I'd recover. Don't talk to me about hard. She kept going, listing all the reasons she deserved a second chance. The kids needed stability. We had history. She missed the way things used to be. It was all nonsense, and I told her so. The only second chance you deserve is a loyalty punch card at the smoothie bar, I said. That shut her up for a second. Then she got defensive. So that's it? You're choosing her? She said, gesturing toward the back where Emma had disappeared. Yeah, Heather, I am. Emma's been here for me when you weren't. She's helped me rebuild my life. You, on the other hand, burned it down and walked away. Right on cue, Emma walked back into the room. Who's this? She asked casually, like Heather was some random stranger who'd wandered in off the street. Heather's face turned bright red. She stammered something about needing to leave and practically bolted out the door. Emma raised an eyebrow at me. Let me guess, she said. Heather? Yup. What did she want? To get back together. Emma snorted. Wow. Bold move for someone who ditched you for a guy named Chase. A few days after that, Heather called me again. This time, she was calmer, almost pitiful. She started talking about how hard things were for her, now that Chase was gone. I don't know how I'm going to make it on my own, she said. I didn't have much sympathy left. Maybe try doing what I did. Start over and figure it out, I said. She tried one last guilt trip. What about the kids? Don't they deserve a full family? They will have one soon, I said. It just doesn't include you. That was the last I heard from her for a while. Looking back, it was kind of satisfying to see Heather finally face the consequences of her choices. For years, she'd controlled the narrative, making me out to be the bad guy while she played the victim. But now, the truth was out, and she had to deal with it. I won't lie, I felt a little smug watching her squirm. But mostly, I felt relieved. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was at her mercy. I had my kids, my business, and a future that didn't include Heather. Things started getting better afterwards. First off, the lawsuit. Well, it took forever, but the case finally wrapped up. The construction company tried every trick in the book to dodge responsibility. Blaming me, blaming the weather, blaming the guy who assembled the scaffolding. But my lawyer, Rick, wasn't having it. He tore their arguments apart piece by piece. The judge ended up siding with me, and the payout was substantial. I'm not going to throw numbers around, but let's just say it was enough to change my life. I used the money to expand the event business Emma and I had been building. We upgraded our equipment, hired more staff, and started landing bigger gigs. Weddings, corporate events, festivals. You name it, we were there. The best part? I finally had the financial stability to give my kids the life they deserved. I bought a house, a real home where they each had their own room, no more cramming into guest spaces. I set up college funds for Ellie, Liam, and Zoe, something I never thought I'd be able to do. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The custody battle was next. Heather didn't even put up a fight. I think she knew the kids had made up their minds. And honestly, she probably didn't want the responsibility anymore. She signed the paperwork without a fuss. And just like that, they were mine again. Emma and I also got closer than ever. Running the business together had already made us a solid team, but now we were building a life together too. She was my rock through everything, and I made sure to let her know how much I appreciated her. As for Heather, well, she went back to her hometown. Last I heard, she's working part-time at a retail store and living in a small apartment. The kids now see her for who she really is. They still visit her occasionally, but it's clear where their home is now. Thanks for sticking around and reading my story. Honestly, writing this wasn't easy. It dragged up a lot of old stuff I thought I'd buried under bad dad jokes and late-night pizza runs. But hey, here we are. I'm definitely not the same guy I was before the accident. I mean, for starters, my walk is somewhere between a penguin and a zombie shuffle, which makes sneaking up on anyone completely impossible. But I've learned to laugh at it because, really, what else can you do? At least I've got a good excuse for skipping leg day. Life's not perfect, but it's damn good. I've got my kids back, a business that doesn't make me dread Mondays, and Emma, who somehow tolerates my weird walking and even weirder sense of humor. And for all of that, I'm incredibly lucky. If you're reading this and life's got you pinned, just remember, it's okay to be down, but don't stay there. Take the punches, laugh when you can, and keep getting back up. You never know what's waiting on the other side, even if it's just a house full of teenagers rolling their eyes at your jokes. Thanks again for hanging out and letting me share this wild ride. Take care, keep fighting, and if you're ever at a wedding with perfect lighting, think of me.